Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Thank you for listening, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com. If you podcast, I appreciate you doing that. On demand at ProgressiveVoices.com. Thank you for listening. So as we start a new week, which could, I guess, prove to be a pretty pivotal week for the Biden-Harris campaign, for the nation, for the Democratic Party, we've seen a lot of back and forth between factions within the party about who should be the nominee on the ballot in November in 2024's presidential election. And if you think party leadership is confused, if you think you hear me and I'm confused, and I'm very confused. I don't really know solidly where I stand on what should be done at this point. I will consistently say that I have been pretty consistent in saying that President Joe Biden all along should have been a one-term president. The president being the magnanimous elder statesman planting trees for which he shall not enjoy the shade of, right? I think that would have made him a great in history. Historians would have looked back 50, 100 years into the future and said, wow, what a magnanimous, selfless act. But we're not at that point. We're beyond that now. And like many American voters, I don't really know solidly what the Democratic Party should do or what Joe Biden should do. And I think the clock is running low on how much time there is to make such a decision if he were to back out. I want to play for you a clip from yesterday's Face the Nation, where they went to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania voters to ask them what their thoughts are with regards to President Joe Biden continuing to be in the race as the Democratic nominee versus bowing out, and who they're going to vote for if he does stay in. Pretty interesting stuff. Take a listen. Just as confused after listening to this as I was before, but you decide for yourself.
Our CBS News campaign journalists have been out talking with them in two battleground states, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Here are their voices.
It's choosing the lesser, the two evils, I feel like. And Joe Biden's not really evil. It's just I don't think he's fully equipped for the job at his age and mental capacity right now. Trump, I'm not a fan.
I think it's time to back off. I'm suspicious that things aren't as good as they were, and maybe things were being hidden from us.
Is there anything he can do to kind of regain confidence from voters?
Possibly. I mean, if he speaks well, looks confident, poised, possibly. But I'm worried that for short periods of time he can probably pull that off. I'm worried about the endurance it requires to really hold that office. It's a lot.
So Jamel, at this point, no, it's a little too late for that. I think he'll do fine.
I'm worried that he's not going to kind of listen to the common sense voices who are calling for him to let someone else carry the torch from here on out. I would still vote for him. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kind of unenthusiastic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the alternative is just too stark, and that would worry me too much.
Do you think Biden would lose to Trump right now?
I do, yeah.
I could probably see myself voting for Biden again, I guess. Just like last resort. I mean, I know that he said that he wouldn't be running again if he didn't absolutely believe that he was capable of running again, but I mean, the proof is in the pudding. He's not really fit, and I think everybody can kind of see that.
I think there's nobody in the wings who could beat Trump. I think Biden can beat him again.
None of those clips, none of those proclamations would appear in a Biden-Harris TV or radio advertisement, right? And if you had to make me swear on a stack of Bibles or to tell the truth, I think, honestly, that is where the hesitancy to fully rally behind the ticket as it currently stems from. I think a lot of Democrats, a lot of liberals, a lot of progressives have felt this way for quite a while. And we sat back and we watched as President Biden dared Donald Trump to agree to debates, make my day, remember that, And then we thought, okay, well, we're going to see how this all shakes out. We're going to see our guy get in the ring and hammer Donald Trump on his many flaws, and it didn't happen. The opportunities were there. The opportunities were aplenty. And make no mistake, we can go back and watch this debate, and I wouldn't encourage you to do it, but you could go back and watch this debate, and while it was a poor performance by President Joe Biden, he did have his moments, despite allegedly having a cold and the weak voice. Although I must say, I was watching his interview with George Stephanopoulos Friday, and I felt like the voice was weak again. Then again, it was, well, actually, I don't know what time of day it was recorded. It wasn't like at the end of the day, but you still hear the weakness of the voice. Maybe it's, you know what, I'm not going to speculate. And a little bit later, we'll dissect that interview because I think there were some opportunities, again, for Joe Biden to say something, to do something, to agree to some things that he opted not to that would have, I think, assuaged the American voter. And in not taking the bait on some things, actually just continues to exacerbate doubts. In the meanwhile, someone older than him, who sounds as strong as he did in 2016, intellectually, verbally, one Senator Bernie Sanders, the independent senator from Vermont, who was on Face the Nation, who literally followed up that clip of swing state voters in this interview. I want you to listen to Robert Costa and Bernie Sanders having this conversation that immediately followed on Face the Nation.
We're joined now by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. He joins us from Burlington, Vermont. Senator Sanders, good morning. You just heard from some Democratic voters in those battleground states. You're a leading voice on the left in this country. Does President Biden now have your full support?
President Biden can clearly defeat Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in the history of this country. And the choice is quite clear. You got in Trump somebody who wants to take away a woman's right to control her body, who thinks that climate change is a hoax, and who has turned his back on the working class of this country. And on the other side, you have Joe Biden, first president in American history to walk a picket line. We have put more money into fighting climate change than any time in the history of this country. We're rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. But this I do want to say, and where I am critical of the Biden campaign. It's one thing to talk about your record over the last 3.5 years, which is a strong record. But the American people are hurting. 60% of our people live in paycheck to paycheck. 25% of elderly people are trying to get by on $15,000 a year or less. The American people want an agenda for the next 4 years that speaks to the needs of the working class of this country. And frankly, I don't think the president has brought that agenda forward. He has got to say, I am prepared to take on corporate greed, massive income and wealth inequality, and stand with the working class of this country. He does that, he's going to win and win big.
Senator Sanders isn't wrong. In fact, this is pretty much the same thing he was saying in 2016, and Democratic Party establishment types were really not paying all that much attention to it. In fact, because the setup is kind of similar. The party of the incumbency is touting economic accolades, bona fides, while running to maintain the office when the American people are dealing with those kitchen table issues, gas prices, grocery prices, inflation affecting our household budget, et cetera, and so on. This is like a rerun of 2016, and Bernie Sanders is the canary in the coal mine. He's warning the establishment, you've got to talk about these kitchen table issues. Unfortunately, since the debate, so much of the conversation has been about anything but issues. It's been about the fitness of the man running for the office, who, again, had an opportunity on Friday to convince the American people in a sit-down interview, an unedited sit-down interview. And I'm going to suggest that he actually kind of didn't do very well then either, if I'm being honest. So yes, Senator Sanders is correct. Talk about the issues. Unfortunately, for the last week and a half, there's been no opportunity to talk about the issues.
So that's your advice for President Biden. You want him to stand with working voters, talk about labor, talk about the minimum wage and those issues. But politically, can he count on you to be on the campaign trail for him this summer and fall? Can he count on your support?
I've already done 6 events in Wisconsin. We've been to New York. I've been to Ohio. And let me say this, and maybe the most important point, Bob, I want to make this morning. What we are talking about now is not a Grammy Award contest for Best Singer. Biden is old. He's not as articulate as he once was. I wish he could jump up the steps on Air Force One. He can't. What we have got to focus on is policy. Whose policies have and will benefit the vast majority of the people in this country? Who has the guts to take on corporate America? Who is talking about expanding Medicare so we cover dental, hearing, and vision? Who's talking about raising the cap on the taxes that people pay into Social Security so we can raise Social Security benefits and extend the life of Social Security for 75 years? Who's talking about a permanent child tax credit to cut childhood poverty in America by 50%? Those are the issues he's talked about. He's got to bring them up in the floor. He's got to promise the American people that if they give him a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House, re-elect him, he's going to do that in the first 100 days. That is what I think the American people want.
And can I just tell you, I feel like, I don't know about you guys, anecdotally anyway, I can say this, on social media, I feel like folks are actually awakening to the issues, not so much from a pro-Democratic side, but man, have you guys seen the groundswell of pushback on Project 2025 on your social media feeds? That is a very new thing. And of course, the former president has distanced himself because of a lot of the pushback on that. However, those who wrote Project 2025 can be traced back to his first administration. So, I mean, do I believe he hasn't read all 900 pages of Project 2020? Absolutely, I believe that. He wouldn't read his daily briefings. I can't imagine he's going to read 900 pages of anything. Again, I understand where Senator Sanders is coming from. Getting back to talking about the issues, unfortunately, because of the debate performance and the aftermath of the debate performance, which is all about being concerned about President Joe Biden's fitness to serve another 4 years, let alone just right now, one of his jobs. He has two jobs. He's a president and he's a candidate for president. One of the jobs, the American people are basically saying, I don't think he can pull it off. And that's winning re-election. And the other job is actually following through if he does win re-election and being able to serve at a high capacity level for another 4 years. And the American voter has doubts about that. And I will push back from a lot of establishment types who, that's the mainstream media's fault. No, the mainstream media did not make Joe Biden perform the way he did in the debate. They did not make him appear the way he did in the interview Friday with George Stephanopoulos. That's not... Don't gaslight us, folks. We see what we see. Anyway, I'm going to take a quick break, come back. The Ron Show on the America One Radio app. You can, and please do, follow the show on your preferred social media platforms. That would be at Ron Show ATL, Facebook, Twitter, X, Threads, Instagram. We're all over it. If I had to pinpoint where my mind is with the presidential election coming up in about 4 months, I think these two people pretty much sum up how I feel.
I'm worried that he's not going to kind of listen to the common sense voices who are calling for him to let someone else carry the torch from here on out. I would still vote for him. Yeah. I mean, I think the alternative is just too stark, and that would worry me too much.
I could probably see myself voting for Biden again, I guess. Just like last resort. I mean, I know that he said that he wouldn't be running again if he didn't absolutely believe that he was capable of running again, but I mean, the proof is in the pudding. He's not really fit, and I think everybody can kind of see that.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
I mean, no, you're never going to... It's not the ringing endorsement, right? Let's go back to the Face the Nation interview with the 2 years older than President Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, when Senator Sanders was asked how he'd feel if Donald Trump won the election, much the way President Biden was asked by George Stephanopoulos on Friday.
How would you feel if former President Trump wins in November?
Well, I would feel awful as somebody who was opposed virtually all of Trump's policies. And I would feel awful if the American people lost the democracy, which we've had for 250 years. And I would feel awful if we turned our back on the existential threat of climate change. But this is not about how I feel. It's not about you feel. It is not even about how Joe Biden feels. It's about how we win this election. And maybe what we should be doing is creating a Democratic Party with Biden at the top that stands with the working class of this country. I will tell you this, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, The American people are disillusioned. They are angry. They think that government is busy paying attention to the rich and wealthy campaign donors. And by the way, I find it personally insulting that the New York Times and all these media organizations go out front page and this is what the billionaire campaign donors feel. Well, to hell with the billionaire campaign donors. Let's worry about the working class of this country and what their needs are.
That dude is still so dialed in on the way the American public feels. It really is a shame that we had this opportunity in 2016, not necessarily to have him win the nomination and become president of the United States. Obviously, I feel that way. But that in the aftermath of his not winning the nomination, he did not get an elevated role in the party at that point in time. I know it's armchair quarterbacking, 8 years in reverse, but I was saying this then too. Just a shame on the Clinton campaign to not be able to form a better coalition with Senator Sanders at that point in time.
Senator Warner of Virginia is collecting colleagues to have a discussion about the future of the ticket. Have you been invited? Will you participate? And what do you think of those talks?
Look, Mark is a friend of mine. I like Mark. He's one of the more conservative members of the Democratic caucus. No, I have not been invited. No, I will not attend. I think right now, look, I understand. Biden had a terrible debate performance. I think he's done better since. He's got to do better again. And I know that is a legitimate concern. But I think most importantly now, this is not a beauty contest. It's not a Grammy Award contest. It is a contest of who stands with the vast majority of the people in this country, the elderly, the children, working class, the poor. And that candidate is obviously Joe Biden.
Senator Sanders, I must ask, I covered you closely in 2016 and 2020. You've run national campaigns. You've been a presidential candidate. You know what it takes. If for whatever reason President Biden ever decided to withdraw from the race, would you be open to being considered as the nominee?
Oh, gosh.
Well, right now I am running for re-election to the great state of Vermont as their senator. That's where my focus is right now.
Look, I don't know Robert Costa. I don't know much about Robert Costa or his work, but that was kind of a dumb question. No. We're not going to replace the 81-year-old nominee with an 83-year-old nominee. No. And clearly the Democratic Party in 2016 wasn't exactly receptive to the idea. Can you imagine at the convention? No, that was just silly talk, my friend. No, I think at the end of the day, if there's going to be some sort of a handoff, it's likely to be current Vice President Kamala Harris. As a matter of fact, friend of the show, Jay Bookman, columnist with the Georgia Recorder, wrote a piece that sort of, I think, exemplified where a lot of voters' minds are when it comes to looking at the two choices and thinking, can we do better? 300 million people, can we do better? The headline, No Country for Old Men. So you know where this is going, right? Jay Bookman writes, a new world is straining to be born, and at some point it requires new American leadership. Joe Biden and Donald Trump, the last of their generation, are both trying to stand in its way. Trump hopes to block and even reverse the emergence of that new world through brute authoritarian force, trying to, quote, make America great again by taking us back to a time in our nation's history that never existed, that we should never allow to exist, that is contrary to our traditions, Bookman writes. What Trump proposes is not conservative leadership, but radical leadership in which his loud voice is the only one that matters. Bookman pivots. By contrast, Biden seeks merely to extend that receding world, which is his world, the world in which he is comfortable because he helped to create it over a 50-year career in high office. He offers himself as a bridge from his generation to the next, from this world to that new world, but just not yet, he says. Biden comes from a world of corn pops and punching time clocks of Formica kitchen tables on linoleum floors with an AM radio playing in the background. Trump comes from dark Manhattan restaurants and steaks covered in ketchup, of backroom deals and yes men and white men and compliance secretaries in a Mad Men world. Trump has never Googled, has never used Google as a verb, and has never asked Siri a damn thing, and I doubt that Biden has either. Bookman continues, for the moment, for now, that is not necessarily a disqualification. Biden has been a more than competent president during a difficult 4 years, but he has also given even his supporters cause to doubt whether he can do so for the 4 years still to come. That concern is not a media fabrication. I agree wholeheartedly. It is not a Republican psyop. If Biden's chilling performance in the Atlanta debate was an accurate indication of his remaining capabilities, then his time in a leadership role may be coming to an end. So far, his aides and many Democratic officials keep telling us that the debate was a glitch, a rare occurrence. It would be a great relief if that proves true. However, their words of secondhand reassurance are not sufficient to overcome what millions of Americans witnessed firsthand a week ago. Do not tell us, Jay Bookman writes, show us. And if you cannot show us, then arrangements should be made, he continues. I'll pick up with the rest of that op-ed and some thoughts on it and where the party is or isn't moving, or if it's just another week of wait and see. That appears to be the case. But there are a growing number of voices coming out saying Biden should at least consider stepping aside. Anyway, that conversation continues on The Ron Show, on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, wherever you podcast.
Archived audio, blogs, social media links, and more, all in one place. Log on at RonShowATL.com. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
America's anxiety-riddled 2024 election cycle continues. It's just like a blockbuster movie, and I really just want to fast forward to the end to see how it concludes. Nonetheless, the thing that I think we have to keep reminding ourselves is the majority of the American public does not want Donald Trump to be reelected. It's figuring out how we get there that seems to be the problem. That's the, I like to talk polls, and I always point out the number 50. If a candidate isn't getting above 50%, ever, even if his sole opponent isn't either, you have to remember the number 50. And it's different in a presidential election because, as we learned in 2000, as we learned in 2016, the leading candidate doesn't need to get 50%. He needs to get 270. It's 270 to win, 270 electoral votes. And we could sit here and argue about the Electoral College and it's needing to be tweaked. And actually, you don't even have to tweak it. You just uncap the House to meet the population demands set in the 1930s to what they are now. And voila, all of a sudden we don't have the disparities that we have from the least populous state to the more populous states. And each voter has a proportionate amount of power in making their vote count towards who becomes the president of the United States. I could sit here and go into that all I want to. No, we're just dealing with these facts that the American public, the majority of the American public, does not want Donald Trump to be president. It's just figuring out how we get there. And the Democratic Party, I can be as critical as anybody of the Democratic Party. This goes back to my Bernie leanings. We had him on a lot the first half of the show from his interview with Face the Nation. The Democratic Party does not always do a very good and or even credible job in setting the table for letting democracy decide who will lead the party and the country. This primary season was not a good example of setting the table for democracy. It just wasn't. I'll even take some of the blame. I did not believe that Congressman, was it Dean Phillips, should have mounted a campaign against Joe Biden, mostly because he is the incumbent and by all accounts within the White House and in Washington from those who were key figures in the Democratic Party, he's ready to go. Were we then misled, or is this a recent development that now party officials, those in his inner circle feel, gosh, if only these developments had occurred a year and a half ago, we could have made a different decision. I don't know. And that sort of frankness, it's taboo in politics. And perhaps they're in this position where, well, we can't go back now. There's all this talk about what'll happen at the state level, what the GOP might do. And there's some truth to the surmising that the GOP at the state level, if there's some sort of change in who's on the ticket, might create all these lawsuits and spend millions of dollars, both sides, to try and get this dealt with before the election. There's there's some legitimate hand-wringing about that too. Don't sit here and think for 1 second that the GOP is just going to stand by and let the Democratic Party, if they decide to do so, if Joe Biden decides to step down, they're just going to let them. No. Come on. Have you been asleep at the switch for the last 50 years? This party themselves are not about democracy. We've seen that time and time again. They don't believe in democracy. They like to point out that we're not a democracy, although a representative republic is a form of democracy. Nonetheless, they don't believe, obviously, in pure democracy. No, but I don't know what the answer is if those high in the Democratic Party within the Biden-Harris administration were aware at a time when Marianne Williamson, Dean Phillips were running for office. But I do know that the air in the party was no major candidate or no major prospective candidate needs step forward. And many of them are in the Biden-Harris administration anyway. Obviously, the vice president. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. A lot of people talk about him. Had Gavin Newsom begun to campaign in a serious manner at that point in time, he would have been vilified. It would have ruined his electoral chances for 2028. And if you think I'm wrong, remember that Bernie Sanders just hinted at the notion of running in 2012 against the incumbent President Obama. Just hinted at it and was vilified within the party establishment when he did run in 2016. So the party, the campaign, the president himself are in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because what if this is a recent development, his purported decline? I think we sort of see it. To me, the Meet the Press clip last Sunday showing him in 2018, 2019, then in an interview in 2022, and then it's like, oh, I mean, I guess we could all look at ourselves. Go back through your timeline on Facebook and see how you looked 5 years ago versus today. You'll see a difference. Maybe not in the way you speak or act, but definitely in the way you look, right? I mean, there's some of that, obviously, with President Biden as well. His stature isn't quite what it was. He doesn't have the jogging that he used to have. The hairline, it wasn't great for him. It wasn't great for him 30 years ago. It's not any better today. There's plenty of that. But we've had so much noise on the right about the Heard tapes, the interviews from the special prosecutor that was investigating him hanging on to a few classified documents, which he willingly coughed up and opened the doors and said, look all you want, no big deal, not hiding anything, unlike, you know who. But there's been so much noise from the right about the Heard tapes because Robert Hurd made the insinuation, well, he's just this nice old man and no jury in the land's going to believe that he was, doing anything wrong. But maybe he just wasn't doing anything wrong. I don't know why, we push back on the characterization. But then the debate performance happened, and now we're kind of thinking, oh gosh, there may have been something to the characterization anyway, even though it had absolutely no relevance to the classified documents case itself. So as I started the show today, I'm still in this place where it's like, I don't know what we do. I really don't know what the Democratic Party would do. I don't know what the Biden-Harris campaign will do. And I obviously still don't think President Joe Biden knows what he's going to do. I'm going to go back to the Jay Bookman op-ed, pretty much where we left off. We left off where he said, aides and many Democratic officials keep telling us that the debate was a glitch, a rare occurrence. It would be a great relief if that proves true. However, their words of secondhand reassurance are not sufficient to overcome what millions of Americans witnessed firsthand a week ago. Do not tell us, show us, and if you cannot show us, then arrangements should be made. Jay Bookman continues, I do not know the logistics of trying to change horses in midstream. I don't know the election laws and campaign finance regulations that would have to be navigated to pull off that feat. Few, if any, know these things because it has never been attempted before. And again, maybe that won't be necessary. If Biden can still reassure the American people by his performance that he remains the best hope for defeating Trump, that he can still serve as the bridge to the next generation, then he should remain the nominee. However, those in the Democratic Party who bristle that the question is even being asked are doing their party, their candidate, and the country no good whatsoever. Absolutely. The question must be asked because 4 months from the election, 6 months from an inauguration, we have to know the answer. To that end, I want to go to the George Stephanopoulos interview with President Joe Biden on Friday, and I thought this was a missed opportunity. And if President Biden wasn't prepared for this line of questioning, first of all, how could you not be prepared for this line of questioning? Anyway, listen to what George Stephanopoulos asked.
I know you spoke with your doctor after the debate. What did he say?
He said, he just looked at me and said, "You're exhausted." I said, "Look, I have medical doctors travel me everywhere, every president does, as you know. Medical doctors, some of the best in the world, travel me everywhere I go. I have an ongoing assessment of what I'm doing. And they don't hesitate to tell me if they think there's something wrong."
I know you said you have an ongoing assessment. Have you had a full neurological and cognitive evaluation?
I get a full neurological test every day with me. And I've had a full physical. I had, I've been at Walter Reed for my physicals. Yes, the answer is.
I know your doctor said he consulted with a neurologist. I guess I'm asking a slightly different question. Have you had the specific cognitive tests, and have you had a neurologist, a specialist, do an examination?
No one said I had to. No one said, they said I'm good.
Would you be willing to undergo an independent medical evaluation that included neurological and cognitive tests and release the results to the American people?
This is the opportunity to quell this, to stop this, to nip this in the bud. Where did my Barney Fife come in?
Look, I have a cognitive test every single day. Every day I have that test.
It's not the question.
Everything I do.
No.
Not only am I campaigning, but I'm running the world. And that's not how it sounds like hyperbole. But we are the essential nation in the world. Madeleine Albright was right. And every single day, for example, today, before I come out here, I'm on the phone with the Prime Minister anyway, I shouldn't get into detail, but with Netanyahu. I'm on the phone with the new Prime Minister of England. I'm working on what we're doing with regard to, in Europe, with regard to expansion of NATO and whether it's going to stick. I'm taking on Putin. Every day, there's no day I go through, there are not those decisions I have to make every single day.
And you have been doing that, and the American people have been watching, yet their concerns about your age and your health are growing. So that's why I'm asking, to reassure them, would you be willing to have the independent medical evaluation?
Watch me there's a lot of time left in this campaign. It's over 125 days.
So the
answer, make a decision.
The right answer right now is no, you don't want to do that right now.
No, I've already done it.
That doesn't end skepticism. In fact, if anything, that was an opportunity for President Joe Biden to challenge former President Donald Trump to do the very same thing. The Democratic Party, we when Trump was president, kind of saw some cray-cray. We still do, obviously. We believe that man's not right in the head, right? And wouldn't an independent cognitive exam determine that to be the case or not to be the case? That was another opportunity. And by the way, here we are, America. We're at this point in our existence as a nation where the two leading candidates to lead this country for the next 4 years, we're wanting them both to take cognitive exams. Good job. Good job. Both of us. Both parties. Great job. I'm sorry. That answer to that question that, again, I have to believe the president should have been prepared for and had a better response to. I don't know. Actually, maybe that was the response. Maybe that was a prepared response because it felt pretty prepared. Well, I go through a cognitive exam every day. The job tasks me. It tests me. Yeah, but you have a lot of people working with you and for you and preparing you and briefings and prep studies. We've seen some scuttlebutt in media here where the Biden-Harris campaign sends out prepared questions for interviews. A radio personality was let go about that because it was revealed. And listen, if you're going to sit here and tell me, I do interviews all the time with candidates who or politicians who ask in advance the line of questioning and then send some suggested discussion points. They all do this. This isn't just a Biden thing. They all want to control the narrative, or else you won't get the interview. Anyway, as I was watching the George Stephanopoulos interview, I actually thought the first 4 or 5 minutes were pretty good for President Biden, where he laid out the rationale, the vision for his campaign and the accomplishments of his first 4 years in office, and laid out as Bernie Sanders scolded, excoriated to the campaign on Face the Nation yesterday, the case to be made for another 4 years in that trajectory, in that direction. But when asked by George Stephanopoulos, well, will you take an independent cognitive exam? Joe Biden's answer should have been, sure, if my opponent will do the very same thing. We'll set it up. You set up the debate. You allegedly have another one set up for September 5th. Although if I'm former President Trump, why would I show up to that? The only thing that can happen for Trump in that debate is that he performs poorly or opens the door for President Biden to perform admirably. There's no reason for Trump to show up to that debate. But dueling independent cognitive exams, again, America, this is where we are, is the thing that I think would have, if President Biden is confident in his cognition and his campaign and White House staff are as well, then there would have been no hesitation. See, that's why I say this doesn't end the speculation. This doesn't end the scrutiny. This doesn't end the doubt. When you dodge that, well, he didn't dodge the question. He answered it, but he answered no. And that just leaves me confused still. Back after this, The Ron Show on America One Radio. Final stretch of The Ron Show. This is evidenced by the music. I get occasionally beat up. I'll get somebody who'll send me a DM, an email, a text even. And you can do that too, 404-919-2725. Call, text, email ron@ronshowatl.com. Hit me up at ronshowatl on the Twitter X platform, Facebook, Instagram, Threads. If you want to beat me up because I'm having this discussion, and this is mostly a discussion going on inside my head too, then by all means, feel free to do so. I'm not going to shield myself or anyone who chooses to keep listening from realities. I'm not going to stick my foot in the river and insist my foot is dry. I'm not going to watch a debate performance and try and tell myself I'm not seeing a pattern. The George Stephanopoulos interview did not really point me in a different direction. Oh, he's still got it. The Bernie Sanders interview, Face the Nation, Sunday. I mean, what is he, 84, 83? I know he's at least 2 years older than Joe. Dude still got it. If you told me he was running for president, like say he was running for a second term, ain't nothing wrong with that man. Not a thing wrong with that man. And it's not even about age. It's about the vim and the vigor. We all get tired at different points in our lives. We all get tired at different points in our day. So if you want to be mad at me because I'm having this conversation, I don't know what to tell you. I think it's a frank conversation. It's one that we probably should have had. Well, again, when did there become obvious signs of some slowdown? I don't know. Is this an obvious sign of a slowdown? I, again, don't know. Which, again, I go back to President Biden's answer to George Stephanopoulos. Will he take a cognitive? Why would you not agree to that? Unless you yourself have doubts. Unless those around you who prepped you for that interview said, don't say yes to that. They had to know that question was coming, right? Why wouldn't you then? That's my question. And why couldn't you then weaponize that question? Yes, if my opponent will do the same independent cognitive exam. Aha! That's what we'd be talking about. We'd be turning the tables and putting the attention back on your opponent. It's exactly what needs to be done. I tweeted this yesterday. If you happen to have read it before and you're hearing me read it again, that's why I'm reading it again. This is how I legitimately feel about all of this. I won't accept being scolded for seeing what we all saw and being deeply concerned as a result. If party ops and White House staffers were holding their breath, hoping for the best, but seeing evidence of less, this teeth gnashing by all of us is on them. We were all told President Biden is our nominee, and we shamed any primary opposition. Hell, I did, based on their confidence. I have, however, consistently said all along that Biden's best play from the jump was to proclaim his intent to only serve one term and set the table for a robust primary for the next generation of liberal and progressive leaders to ascend to plant trees knowing he'd never enjoy the shade from them. The act of selflessness atop his successful presidency would have put him among the greats of this nation for history to glom over. Instead, we're sweating what may well be the presidential version of RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She stayed in and she stayed in and she stayed in. And then she wound up being a justice during the Trump presidency and tried to hang on, literally, figuratively, physically, and didn't make it. And how'd that go for us? And any of us openly wondering if it's time to consider another option are scolded for it. Back the off. We cannot be the left-leaning version of the GOP that puts one person's ego over the needs of the nation, particularly in the most perilous of circumstances. Millions of marginalized citizens, women in or to be in their reproductive era, the impoverished, the unhealthy, the yet-to-be victims of senseless gun violence, our NATO and Pacific allies, humanity's future on a continually warming and more climate-hostile planet, all have a lot riding on this election. Oh yeah, and our republic. There's that too. I'm not going to be shamed for being openly concerned that the Democratic Party hasn't played their hand well thus far and realize there's no valid reason to think that'll change the next 4 months when the evidence of the last 12 plus or further back tells me what my gut does too. Sorry, not sorry. Will I vote for Joe Biden in November? Of course. Abso-damned-lutely. I have joked, if it's Weekend at Bernie's versus Liar Liar, guess which movie I'm checking out for the next 4 years? Late fees be damned, Blockbuster. Come and get me. Obviously, I'm going to vote for, how did that one lady say it? She said the lesser of two evils. What was that clip again? Let's get that.
It's choosing the lesser, the two evils, I feel like. And Joe Biden's not really evil. It's just I don't think he's fully equipped for the job at his age and mental capacity right now. Trump, I'm not a fan.
To finish off Jay Bookman's op-ed in the Georgia Recorder, which I'll include in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. The obvious replacement for Biden, should that become necessary, is Vice President Kamala Harris. Most of the criticism directed at Harris seems based more on her gender and race than her actual performance in office, in part because the performance of a vice president is so difficult for outsiders to accurately judge. He goes into a Truman spiel. Anyway, he finishes. Either way, though, I have absolutely zero doubt that Harris would perform far better in the White House than the man who tried to cling to it through fraud and even violence, who was called for the termination of the Constitution itself if that means he can be returned to the power he craves. It's this last paragraph where I believe we all sort of are. If Joe Biden can demonstrate that he still has the capacity to serve as candidate and as president, he should remain in those roles, Bookman writes. If he cannot, he should finish out his term and allow Harris to become head of the ticket, knowing that by doing so, he gives his country its best chance to stay true to itself and its bright future. Meanwhile, speaking of cognitive decline, Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene tweets, the average age of the signers of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776 was 44 years old, but more than a dozen were 35 or younger, and then lists James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, James Monroe, Aaron Burr, Paul Revere, and George Washington, none of whom were signers of the Declaration of Independence. And that tweet stays up. Why? I mean, not the loveliest face to save, but hey, lady, delete the post to save face. By the way, the life expectancy back then was like 43 years of age. So I guess they kind of were old, even if they were 35 at the point. Anyway. Show notes and more, ronshowatl.com. We'll continue the conversation, or maybe we'll move on to another one tomorrow. I don't know. We'll see. Hear the replay 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, on demand all day at progressivevoices.com, and then wherever you podcast. Have a good one.